In 1192, Minamoto no Yoritomo asked a question. What do you regret more? The battle you lost or the one that you never fought? Here's the uncomfortable truth. This whole episode is built on almost nobody regrets taking the leap. They regret standing at the edge, looking down and walking away. Marcus Aurelius famously wrote a book to himself at night. As the most powerful man in the world, because even emperors lie awake wondering if they're about to waste the one life that they've got. And if someone like that, at the precipice of trying to take over the world, lead his entire nation to prosperity, still wondered, am I doing the right thing? Then I think it's okay to be able to believe in ourselves or believe that asking that question doesn't make us weak. It just makes us human. Today, we're going to go into the minds of people who didn't have the luxury of hesitation. Stoic philosophers, samurais, generals who moved armies across continents, and we're stealing their answer to the question that's actually been sitting in the back of your mind for years. What am I waiting for? This whole episode was built off the back of an earlier episode when I talked deeply about the art of war and how it relates to modern society that went really well. I got a lot of positive feedback from it. So I wanted to go a little deeper and from a different angle, but still keep it kind of short and concise, because this episode isn't about ancient history. It's about a feeling that almost everyone listening to this has had at 2 a.m., that low-grade ache of, I had a shot at something and I didn't take it. It's like when you have the conversation with the girl, I'm like, I should have said this. I knew that would have been a perfect line, but it's only retrospectively looking back that we're able to see what we didn't see in that moment. And it also could come from a business that you didn't start. You look back 12 months, 36 months, and think, fuck, I should have done that then. Or I should have started that earlier. Or I should have bet on myself. I should have gone and done the thing I knew I was afraid to do. And here's the thing about that numbing ache. It doesn't go away on its own. And it doesn't get easier to ignore the older you get. In fact, it gets fucking worse. The research on this is genuinely interesting. When people look back over decades of their lives, the things that haunt them the most aren't even the embarrassing things. It's the things that they didn't do. What's interesting is that every culture that's produced any serious thinkers about how to live, the Greek and Roman, the Greek and Roman Stoics, Japanese swordsmen, Persian mystics, Mongol and French generals arrived at almost the same conclusion from completely different starting points. They didn't agree on much, but they all agreed on this. Hesitation is the most expensive thing a human can do. And most of us are doing it constantly, even without noticing. Here's what culture tells you about fear: that it's a problem to be solved. Eliminate it, conquer it, feel the fear and do it anyway, as if fear is a glitch in the system, that the right mindset hack will allow you to be able to just patch it out and negate it completely. But the Stoics thought this was nonsense. Marcus Aurelius wasn't trying to feel less fear. He was trying to change what the fear was about. His core idea, written in Meditations while running an empire and burying his own children, was that almost everything we're afraid to do falls in one of two categories: things that we can control and things that we don't. And the entire emotional weight of fear comes from us mixing up the two. Miyamoto Musashi, one of the most famous swordsmen in Japanese history, a man who fought and won over 60 duels, several of them to death, starting as a teenager, said something almost identical in the Book of Five Rings, which is an excellent book to read. Today is victory over yourself of yesterday. Not victory over the opponent, victory over the version that you hesitated yesterday. It's the whole concept of just trying to be better than yourself. And here's where things get a little interesting, because modern psychology backs this up in a way that would have made these guys feel pretty proud of themselves. There's a well-established finding in regret research, first shown by Gilovich and Medvich in the 1990s and replicated repeatedly since, including a large public study run through a museum exhibit that collected responses from over 2,600 visitors. That when people reflect on their long-term regrets, inaction is regretted more than action. In the short term, the thing that you did wrong stings more, but give it years, and it's the thing that you didn't do that starts to eat away at you. So the reframe isn't stop being afraid, unless you want to completely change our human operating system as to how to respond to fear. It's that you're going to feel fear either way. The only choice that you get is, do I lean into this or do I run away from it and live to regret? Why did the most powerful man in the world write a private diary basically telling himself to just chill out? Marcus Aurelius was a Roman emperor for almost 20 years, wars on the frontier, a plague that killed millions, betrayed by the people that he trusted. Meditations was never meant to be published. It was his own private journal, written in the field, mostly at night. One of his most repeated lines to himself is something along the lines of, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength. He wrote that not as a guru trying to dispel wisdom or dispense wisdom, but as a guy who just got terrible news from the front line who was trying to talk himself off jumping off a cliff. The takeaway isn't stay calm. It's that even if the most powerful person alive at that moment in time needed a system to stop himself spiraling about things that he couldn't change, and if he needed it with armies and physicians and an empire at his disposal, the idea that you should just be more confident sounds a little absurd. Speaking of philosophers, Socrates chose to die rather than run away. Was that brave or was it stupid? Socrates was sentenced to death by the Athenian state on charges that were, by most modern reasonings, politically motivated. His friends arranged an escape. He had the means, the opportunity, and support, and he said no. His reasoning, as Plato records it, was that he spent his whole life arguing that a person should live according to their principles, even when it is costly. And running away in the final hour would retroactively make everything that he'd ever said a lie. He drank the hemlock surrounded by friends calmly while they wept. This is the most extreme version of a question everyone faces in a miniature. Is the story you tell about yourself, is the story that you tell about yourself worth more than your comfort right now? Most of us will never face Socrates' choice, thankfully, but most of us face a tiny version of it every day. Do I say the thing? Do I have the courage to be able to say the thing, to have the conversation? Or do I bow out? Genghis Khan went from being an exiled orphan teenager hiding in forests to rule the largest empire in human history. So what changed? Before he was Genghis Khan, he was just a young boy whose father was poisoned, whose family was abandoned by their own clan, and who spent part of his youth as a fugitive. At one point, reportedly enslaved by a rival clan before he escaped. The pivotal shift historians point to isn't a single battle. It's that this young boy started building alliances based on loyalty and merit rather than his bloodline, because he didn't have any. At a time when tribal lineage determined everything, he took huge risks, elevating people who had no right to power because he personally experienced what it was like to be on the outside of that system. The lesson isn't that conquer the known world. It's that later in his life, he built a series of relationships or made certain decisions early in his life to act from a position of almost nothing, to form alliances, to take risks, to bet on people, when staying invisible would have been a far safer strategy for an exile kid with nothing to lose and nothing to gain. Napoleon said, "Ask me for anything but time." Napoleon's military reputation was built largely on speed, moving armies faster than his enemies thought possible, attacking before they'd finished preparing. He'd been widely quoted as treating time as one of the most truly irreplaceable resources. At Austerlitz in 1805, Napoleon deliberately appeared weaker than he was. He pulled his forces back, looked like he was retreating to lure the Austrian and Russian armies into attacking before they were properly coordinated. It worked because his opponents hesitated to fully commit, debating and redebating their plan while Napoleon had already decided and acted. The thing that beat the larger, better resourced armies at Austerlitz wasn't superior numbers. It was that one side was still deliberating while the other had already made the choice. And oftentimes that is the case in life. When we have multiple choices, it's better just to make one and commit, because ultimately we look at all these choices as if they're all going to be even. if I take any of these, it may lead to something. But the one that you may not take could have been a terrible choice anyway. If you have two people to ask out and you chose person A, even in the back of your mind, like, oh, maybe the person B was actually going to be a better choice. It could have been a fucking terrible decision. They could have been a stage 5 clinger. It could have been fucking insane. So it's never a case of trying to look back in regret and think, you know what, maybe that would have been a better decision, because the truth is we'll never know. And there is a beauty in that. There is a beauty in just saying, hey, it doesn't matter. I've made this choice. I'm going to commit to this choice. Rumi was also a respected religious scholar who threw it all the way to follow a wandering mystic. Why would someone with everything to lose do that? In 13th century Persia, Rumi was a well-established Islamic scholar and teacher, a position of huge social status and security. Then he met a wandering mystic named Shams of Tabriz, and his life completely reorientated around that relationship and the spiritual awakening that it triggered. Rumi's most famous poetry, the stuff that's still constantly quoted 800 years later, was written after this upheaval, after he'd abandoned the safe, respected version of his life. His students were reportedly furious and confused. Some accounts suggest that Shams was even driven away or killed by people close to Rumi who resented the change in him. The version of Rumi the world actually remembers, the poet, only exists because the respected scholar was willing to risk his entire social position on something that made no sense to the people around him. The safe identity and meaningful one were not the same. He had to make a choice. And that's largely what we have in today's society. Social status is a big component. I often joke that we're living, high school never ends. We're living as adults as we did in high school. Everybody wants to be popular. Everybody wants to be sat at the back of the bus. Everybody wants to be the smoker. Everybody wants to be the cool kid that everyone looks up to and wants to be like. But in reality, that comes at a cost. It comes at the cost of you losing yourself. It comes at the cost of you trying to please others that really don't give a shit about you. They'll drop you in a heartbeat. So stop spending all your time trying to impress people that you potentially don't even like, that don't give a shit about you either. The framework from these people, and I think it's a useful idea to be able to delve into their stories, which we'll do on this episode because we'll be here all year, never mind all day, is understanding a few things. And really this is kind of how I think about this, is that you don't need to feel ready. You need to separate what's yours and what isn't. Marcus Aurelius' split control versus no control isn't a slogan, it's a literal exercise. The next time you're stuck on a decision, write down 2 columns. What can I control and what can't I control? Most of the fear lives entirely in the second column. It's like, I don't control these things. That's partly why we're fearful of it. But if you can just focus on what you can control, you can make progress. And just making progress, taking one step forward, massively reduces anxiety. Stop asking, will this work? Start asking, how can I make this work? There are going to be moments where you're presented with an opportunity and you think to yourself, I don't understand this completely. And that's okay, because you're not meant to know what you don't know. But what you can say is, do I see something in this? I don't know what it is. Is it a potential? Is it opportunity? Is it just a change from what I'm currently doing? And let me play that out. There's a really interesting, it's a book, but it's a protocol called the Odyssey Plan. And essentially, you fast forward your life 5 years, I think it is, and you map it out. And you go, cool, here's what will happen roughly and theoretically in 5 years if I stay on my current path. And you map that out and you write it out. Here's what my life's going to be like. Here's what my finances are going to be like. Here's what my relationship's going to be like. And then you map the alternative out. If I take this other path, you do the same thing. And bullet points are a really easy way to be able to do this. And you just have a good idea, and then you can start to visualize, is this a life that I even want? And if it is, if there's potential in that, run with it. Because again, we're trying to avoid regret, and we can only avoid regret from being courageous in the moment. Oftentimes, the worst thing that can happen is you can go back. You might not go back to the exact same job, you can go back to something similar. Let's say if you work in the finance industry, you might be an accountant at one firm, go be an accountant at another firm. The version of you that you'll become only exists on the other side of the things you're avoiding. Rumi didn't become Rumi by staying the respected scholar. Whatever you're avoiding right now might be the thing standing between you and who you actually are. not who you're pretending to be safe as. A perfect example of this is just before this podcast is I really didn't want to shoot it. I was exhausted. I've got 2 kids under 4. They're a fucking nightmare. I've not had a good night's sleep in at least 4 years. And I'm always tired. And I'm always trying to operate the best that I possibly can. And as many of us just try to show up. And it's 9 o'clock in the morning. I'm falling asleep. I'm like, I've only been awake around 5 hours here. Why am I falling asleep? And there was a moment where I was like, nah, I'm not gonna shoot this because it's probably not going to be perfect. I'm probably going to slur my words. I'm probably not going to speak as eloquently as I want it to be. But I thought, you know what, fuck it. Let's get this set up and let's just hit record. And that's exactly what I did. And I'm just going to hit record and I'm putting it out there. How it performs will be determined by the people listening to this. But ultimately, it doesn't matter because in the grand scheme of things, this is episode 86. When I get to episode 186, I'm not going to remember this. I'm not going to remember that I felt tired on that morning. I'm just going to remember I showed up anyway. I did what I could with what I had and I moved on. The regret you're avoiding by not acting is actually smaller than the regret of trying and failing. It's just quieter and it arrives later. Sorry, I threw myself off there because I actually live on a building site and someone was just cracked up something really loud. And I think they're about to start cutting stone, which is great for this. The discomfort of never trying doesn't arrive straight away. It shows up 5-10 years later. And at that point, it's already too late. So you have to be courageous enough to be able to act in the moment and know that I'm doing this anyway, and I'll accept whatever comes with it. A few years ago, I was talking with someone. I'll call him James because the details aren't that important. And James is the first name that came to my head, who spent almost 15 years at a company that he wanted to stop and quit long before I got to know him. He had a good salary, stable, the kind of job that from the outside, you're like, this is a decent career path, especially by the old paradigm, especially by if you grew up in the 90s, like this is what you need to do. You go to school, you go to university, you graduate, you get a good job, and you stick with that forever. And it was solid. But he used to talk about the idea that he had in his late 20s, something that he wanted to be able to build. And it was completely different to what he was doing. He talked about in a way people would talk about a relationship fondly, the past tense, maybe in another life. And what was interesting to me is that he hadn't done it. He'd built an entire internal narrative to make not doing it feel like wisdom. I was just being realistic. I had responsibilities, and all of this was true, all reasonable from a perspective. And none of it touched the thing underneath, which was that he was scared. He was terrified. The fear had calcified into the sensible choice over 15 years. And he kept just trying to justify that reason. But it stayed there. It was 15 years of talking about this thing that he wanted to do. I think it was like his mid-20s when he started this idea. Now he's in mid-40s and he still talks about that idea. Not with bitterness, but more like he's looking back in regret at a door that he just kept walking past. He's like, I could open that. I couldn't even knock at that door, that opportunity. But he just kept walking past. And for 15 years, it's just walking back and forth and never actually even trying the handle, because that door could have been open and he could have walked straight through it. And sure, it would have been difficult, and sure, it would have had its trials and tribulations. But he never gave himself the opportunity to fail. It's not a story. This is not a story about failure. It's not even a failed idea. He just never had the courage to go for it. And that's the part that really should unsettle most people. That door might not even be locked. The door that opens up to a new relationship or a new opportunity, a new path in life might be open. You might just need to have the courage to turn the handle. Here's the closing thought. The truest thing I can say about everything we've covered today, none of these people, Aurelius, Socrates, Genghis Khan, Napoleon, Rumi, were unafraid. They're human beings at the end of the day. Every single one of them was operating in conditions of genuine, serious risk, often life and death. That's not what we go through in 2026. What separated them wasn't the absence of fear. It was that they'd each, in their own way, stopped treating fear as a stop sign and started to treat it as information. something to look into, to interrogate, to investigate, and then move through it anyway, to understand the fear that it is real, and then find a way to keep moving forward anyway. If there's a door that you've been walking past and you know which one it is, the only thing that's actually changed between the first time you walked past it and today is how long it's been since you've tried the handle. So if there's anything you take away from today, is to walk up that door and just turn the fucking handle. See what happens. If this landed with you or any of the story, share it. Share it with someone that needs to hear it. Share it with someone that needs the courage to be able to just turn the handle. All citations and everything in this episode are linked below. I hope you enjoyed our time together. And if you could, I'd love you to review this podcast. I'd appreciate it.